I stood in my kitchen, surrounded by the remnants of Thanksgiving. Half-filled wine glasses sparkled faintly under the pendant lights, sitting abandoned on my polished countertops. Behind me, a caterer quietly cleared dishes, careful not to make eye contact as I stared at my phone, my grip tightening with every second. Through the speaker, my father's voice played back, sharp, deliberate, cold. "All you ever do is take, Sloan. You've never contributed anything meaningful to this family." The message ended. I replayed it. Once again, his voice pierced the stillness, delivering the same cutting accusation. My breath caught, somewhere between disbelief and something sharper, something jagged. "All I do is take." I placed a trembling hand on the cool stone counter, trying to anchor myself. The caterers moved around me as if I were a statue, untouchable, ignorable. A clatter of silverware hitting the floor startled me. Just 3 hours before, I had been placing fresh flowers by the front door when the bell rang. That familiar ache, equal parts hope and dread, twisted in my stomach as it always did when family came around. I adjusted my cashmere sweater, glanced at myself in the mirror, and opened the door with a smile that felt real and rehearsed all at once. "Happy Thanksgiving," I greeted as I stepped back to let them in. Mom swept past without hesitation, her eyes already scanning my home. "Those curtains are new. Don't you think they're a bit over the top for this space?" Dad nodded vaguely, barely glancing at me, his phone still pressed to his ear as he crossed the threshold. I swallowed the first pang of disappointment. "The caterers are in the dining room. Can I get you a drink?" I asked. Before they could answer, Tessa's luxury car pulled into the driveway. She stepped out in a cloud of expensive perfume, hair flawless despite the autumn wind. Cody followed, looking rough, unshaven, hungover, but somehow still pulling off that careless charm of his. "Sloan," Tessa air-kissed my cheek. "You look exhausted. Business stressing you out?" "Business is going well," I said, skipping the fact that I'd worked through the night to finish the design job funding this whole evening. No one offered help. They lounged in my living room, sipping the wines I had personally selected, criticizing my art choices while I coordinated with the staff and checked the place settings one last time. When we finally sat down at the table, set with imported linens and antique china I'd sourced myself, Dad stood for a toast. For a brief second, I felt a flicker of hope. "To family," he said, glass raised. "To the ones who always step up when it counts." His eyes skipped over me. Everyone else nodded solemnly, like they were the ones who had saved our family home during the pandemic. Like they were the ones who covered Tessa's legal fees or paid Cody's late rent. "The turkey seems dry," Mom muttered as I served her plate. Later, as dessert was being cleared, Tessa pulled me aside with a familiar smile, the one that always came before a favor. "The boys need new hockey gear," she began, reminding me her divorce settlement was still unresolved. I didn't even process the rest. My mind flashed to the $45,000 I had lent our parents back in 2020, with a legal agreement drawn up by my attorney, Daniel. Money never acknowledged. Certainly never returned. I thought of the cabin I bought by the lake, a place for the family to gather and, hopefully, see me for who I was. They'd used it endlessly. Never once said thank you. Back in the kitchen, I unlocked my phone and opened my banking app. There they were. $2,000 to my parents every month. $1,500 to Tessa. $950 to Cody for a temporary housing situation going on 3 years. And yet my father said, I never gave anything that mattered. A tear rolled down my cheek, cool and certain. I hovered over the first transaction. Then canceled it. And the next. And the next. With each canceled payment, my breath came easier. The walls around me seemed to stretch. The space expanded, like I was finally being given room to breathe. A quiet sound escaped me, a strange mix of laughter and disbelief. "If I've truly never given anything," I whispered, slipping my phone back into my pocket, "then I suppose I can stop now." The next morning, before the sun even rose, I slipped my leather overnight bag into the trunk of my car. The street was still asleep, homes cloaked in silence, porch lights painting golden circles on driveways. My hands trembled slightly as I glanced at my phone one last time, vision blurred by tears that hadn't yet fallen. 27 missed calls. 43 unread texts. All from people who claimed I never gave them anything. I whispered aloud, almost like a prayer, "The cabin." Outside Portland. The engine purred to life. The clock on the dash read 5:17 a.m. I had tried to sleep after canceling the payments, but rest wouldn't come. Every time I shut my eyes, my father's voice echoed again, "All you do is take." I drove away from the home I had painstakingly renovated, the Georgian colonial with its balanced facade and curated interiors, none of which my family had ever truly appreciated. The tires hummed against the wet asphalt as Austin faded behind me. The Texas hills slowly disappeared in the mirror, still blanketed in darkness. As I headed north, I hovered over the airplane mode button on my phone. With a firm press, I silenced the world. "Let them wonder," I whispered. A hush followed, deep and unfamiliar, like surfacing from a long dive and taking a full breath for the first time in years. By mid-morning, I crossed into Oklahoma. Snow lightly coated the roadside, transforming everything around me into something strange and new. A reflection, maybe, of the inner landscape I was just beginning to reclaim. 3 days later, I stood on the porch of a cedar cabin, surrounded by Oregon forest. The air was thick with pine and the damp scent of earth after rain. No one knew I was there, except Daniel, my lawyer, who had promised not to tell a soul. Mist drifted between the trees, shrouding their tops like the fog finally lifting from my mind. I opened my sketchbook on the cabin's old wooden table. My pencil moved as if guided by something deeper than thought. These drawings weren't for clients. Not for approval. Not for family. They flowed freely, mine and mine alone. I had slept through the night for the first time in ages. Back in Austin, my phone lay charging and silent on my kitchen counter, collecting their worry and outrage like confessions in a sacred booth. "Sloan," my car payment bounced. "Call me now." Tessa's voice rang with indignation, as if my money had always belonged to her. "Hey, sis. Something weird with my rent. Landlord's freaking out. Need to talk." Cody's easy tone barely concealed his anxiety. "Sloan Elizabeth, this isn't funny. The mortgage alerts say we're behind. Call us immediately." My mother's voice cracked as she neared the end. The messages stacked up as the days rolled on, shifting from demands to confusion, from anger to fear. Entitlement was meeting its first real obstacle. I lost track of time in that cabin. I hiked until my legs ached. I sketched until my hand cramped. I sat by the fire and watched the flames shift and twist, beautiful and hungry. 3 weeks passed. One morning, I stood barefoot at the large window of the cabin, watching an eagle soar above the treetops. I had already booked the place for several weekends in the coming year. This cabin had become my refuge. A space to breathe. To reclaim. I smiled gently and whispered, "I'm ready," even though I knew the eagle couldn't hear me. The drive back to Texas felt different this time. It wasn't an escape anymore. It was a choice. My hands were steady on the steering wheel. My shoulders finally relaxed, no longer tensed into armor. I arrived home after midnight. My house greeted me like an old friend, scented with cedar oil, wood polish, and the spices from the potpourri blend I had made myself. I watered the plants I'd neglected. Ran my fingers along the spines of my books, chosen one by one. As morning light spilled through the windows, I cradled my coffee and turned airplane mode off. The phone buzzed relentlessly, texts, emails, voicemails, a digital tantrum laid bare. The last one, a voicemail from Tessa, came in just the day before. They repossessed my car. In front of the boys. Do you even know how humiliating that was? What kind of sister are you? I placed the coffee on the counter and typed into the family group chat. Thought I never gave this family anything. Replies poured in instantly. Where have you been? How could you abandon us like this? We've been worried sick. Is this some kind of breakdown? Not a single message said, sorry. Not one. I called Daniel's office and scheduled a meeting for the next day. Then, I silenced my phone again and walked back to my design table. Sunlight stretched across the paper sketches I brought home from Oregon. These lines were mine. They weren't shaped by guilt or obligation. They were born from silence and space and something dangerously close to joy. My father's voice still haunted me sometimes. All you do is take. But now I could hear the truth hidden beneath his words. What he really feared was that I'd stop giving. I picked up my pencil and added one final, unwavering line to my drawing, the beginning of something new. The following morning, the landline in my office rang for what felt like the 7th time. Each shrill chime swung the cord slightly, but I refused to pick it up. My assistant, Margot, appeared in the doorway, her glasses glinting in the soft light. It's your mother again, she said gently, but firmly. Should I say you're tied up with a client? I gave a nod, turning back to the architectural sketches spread across my drafting table. The Marquee Project. The biggest job of my career. 60,000 square feet of blank canvas, a complete overhaul of their flagship property in downtown Austin. And then, Margot paused. And Sloane, she hesitated, uncomfortable. Cody's downstairs. Again. My pencil snapped between my fingers. I slowly placed the broken halves on the table and inhaled, like Daniel had coached me. Tell him I'm not available, I said calmly. And if he shows up here intoxicated again, have security escort him out. Margot gave a small nod, her expression caught between sympathy and admiration. It had been 3 weeks since I cut the payments. 3 weeks of mounting panic from my family. 3 weeks of rediscovering a strength I didn't know I had. 20 minutes later, I heard the elevator doors chime downstairs, followed by Cody's voice echoing through the building, louder, angrier than before. You can't just ignore us. Mom needs her medicine. Don't you even care? My palms pressed against the drafting table, bracing. But the guilt didn't come. Not this time. Instead, I heard the low murmur of the security guard, then the ding of the elevator closing behind him. And silence. My phone buzzed against the table. A third message from Tessa. Mom's blood pressure is through the roof, because of you. Hope you're happy playing the victim while we all suffer. I flipped the phone over, face down, and returned to my work. Oddly enough, while my family spun into chaos, my professional world had never thrived more. Just yesterday, the Marquee executive signed off on my initial designs without requesting a single change. A career first. Then the door opened without a knock. Daniel walked in, briefcase swinging, tie loosened. He placed a folder on my desk without a word. They're trying to fight you over the cabin, he said simply. They're saying you bought it under false pretenses, as if it was meant to be a shared family property, not yours alone. I let out a laugh. Flat. Dry. False pretenses? I've got emails where they asked me to find a lakefront place with 4 bedrooms. Daniel sat across from me, legs crossed. And now, he added, they're telling people you're unstable. Mentally unwell. I felt something clench inside. Leah called my office this morning, Daniel continued, watching me carefully. They've been spreading the story to extended family. Leah. We were once close. Time and distance had loosened that bond, but hearing her name still stirred something deep. What did she say? I asked, quieter than I intended. Daniel's face broke into a small, rare smile. She said, and I quote, tell Sloan it's about damn time she stopped carrying them. A warmth bloomed in my chest. Someone saw. Someone finally understood. My phone buzzed again. A group text from my father. Your behavior is tearing this family apart. We've always supported your little design business. Is this how you repay us? Little design business. The same business that paid their mortgage for 2 years. The one that funded Tessa's lawyer. The one keeping a roof over Cody's head. I slid the phone toward Daniel. Add it to the folder. He nodded, tucking it away. The 90-day notice was delivered, he added. They have until March 15th to repay the loan. I imagined the calendar in my mind, drawing a bold red circle around that day. The day of reckoning. They'll push back, I said. It wasn't a question. Absolutely, Daniel replied, standing and straightening his blazer. You might want to consider staying somewhere else. Your home address is public. I nodded, and we made a plan. 2 hours later, Margot reappeared, her lips tight. Tessa's downstairs, with the boys. The receptionist said they were tearing through the lobby, yanking down fabric samples. Using her kids as leverage. My stomach twisted. I missed those boys, their hugs, their toothy grins. But turning them into bargaining chips? That crossed a line I hadn't thought she'd cross. Have security ask them to leave, I said. If Tessa wants to speak with me, she can make a professional appointment. Margot nodded and walked out. Daniel looked at me thoughtfully. You're stronger than they thought, he said softly. I nodded, but inside, his words didn't sit quite right. I never wanted to be the strong one. I just wanted to be seen. To be valued. My email chimed. Subject line, urgent, mom in hospital. Your fault. I shut the laptop. Just last week it was Dad's heart. Before that, Cody's eviction threat. If it were really a medical emergency, I muttered, more to myself, they could sell the boat. The one they bought after I paid for their new roof. Daniel's phone rang. He frowned at the screen. Your dad again. 4th time today. Block the number, I said, turning back to my blueprints. All of them. After he left, I stood by the tall windows of my office. The city shimmered, glass towers casting long shadows in the winter sun. For a brief moment, I saw everything like a floor plan. Clean lines. Purposeful choices. My family had no design. No structure. Only endless demands that expanded to fill every inch I gave. My phone vibrated again, a message from an unknown number. My mother, using someone else's phone. Your father and I gave you everything. We sacrificed so much for your education. And this is how you repay us. I placed the phone in a drawer and closed it with finality. On the wall, a red circle marked March 15th. The foreclosure date. The day I take back what's mine, not just the money, but my dignity. I turned back to my drawing. My hand was steady. The next curved wall I drafted opened up space for light, a light they never let me walk into before. Auction day. I checked my reflection in the car's rearview mirror, adjusting the collar of my silk blouse. It was a simple cream piece, understated. Today, I didn't need to wear my power. My actions would speak loud enough. Outside the windshield, the auction sign shimmered faintly in the morning light as I turned into the familiar cul-de-sac where I spent my childhood. Long shadows stretched across pristine lawns, the kind of neighborhood where people pretend not to stare while catching every detail. I had prepared for this. Black coffee. 15 minutes of steady breathing. A calming phone call from Daniel assuring me that every document was solid. The old brass key to my parents' house sat untouched on my kitchen counter at home, a quiet symbol of a connection severed. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Daniel had asked. "I've never been more certain," I'd told him, my voice calm, unwavering. But as I pulled into the driveway, something twisted deep inside, not from hesitation, but from the theatrical scene that greeted me. They were all there, lined up like soldiers defending a fortress. My entire family stood in front of the auction sign, forming a wall of guilt and resentment. Dad was in the center, arms folded tightly, his stance the same one he used to intimidate car dealers and bank tellers. Mom stood beside him, clutching a tissue to her face, eyes red and watery with accusation. Tessa looked like a magazine ad, arms crossed, designer shades resting atop her perfect hair. Cody was pale, unshaven, hands buried in the pockets of jeans I probably still paid for. Even Mrs. Lawson from across the street was pretending to water flowers that didn't need watering. The Hendersons took slow, curious steps on their morning walk. I sat in my parked car for a beat longer, the interior a bubble of stillness in the center of their emotional storm. Dad stormed toward me before I could even close the door. "What do you think you're doing?" "Exactly what the certified letter said I would," I replied. The car door clicked shut, soft, but final. "Your mother hasn't slept in weeks," he said, his voice dropping into the shaming tone he reserved for private conversations. "Is this really what you want? To destroy your own family?" I laughed, a sound so unfamiliar that even Tessa flinched. "Raised me, or used me?" I said, holding his gaze. Mom stepped forward then, blotting tears that may or may not have been real. "We gave you everything, Sloan. A beautiful home, a good education, mounting debt and impossible expectations," I cut in. "That's what you gave me. And speaking of debts, how's that $45,000 loan coming?" Dad's face flickered, shock, then smooth manipulation. "Sweetheart, we've always supported your little business," he said, softening his tone. "Remember how proud we were when you landed that first big job? The one you told Uncle Robert the first only got because the client wanted to sleep with me?" I asked, voice like steel. "Yes, I remember." Tessa stepped forward, the peacemaker mask slipping into place. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said. "Families say things they don't mean. So when you told your divorce lawyer I'd cover all your legal fees, that was just an accident?" I pulled out my phone. "Shall I read the message?" "Sloane's good for it. She always is." Cody's voice cracked as he tried to chime in. "We always believed in your dreams." "No," I said clearly. "You believed in my wallet. You assumed I would never stop giving." At that moment, the auctioneer's car rolled up, followed by several vehicles I recognized from the open house inspection. Interested buyers. Dad leaned in, his voice sharp with warning. "You'll regret this for the rest of your life." I reached into my purse and pulled out the printout of the Thanksgiving voicemail. It fluttered slightly in the breeze as I held it up. "All you do is take, Sloan," I read aloud. "You've never given this family anything that matters. I'm just honoring your opinion. Mom let out a dramatic sob, something between a wail and a stage cry. Tessa rushed to her side, whispering something as she glared at me. My kids will never know you, she hissed. I'll make sure of that. The auctioneer stepped forward, clipboard in hand. He glanced at the assembled family drama, clearly used to scenes like this but still slightly uncomfortable. You don't get to threaten me anymore, I said softly. You didn't see me when I was carrying everything. You don't get to see me now, as I'm laying it all down. I turned to the auctioneer and extended my hand. Mr. Calloway, I believe we're ready to begin. 3 months later. I stood in the heart of a sunlit, adobe-style home, the echoes of my footsteps bouncing softly off the clay tile floors. The rooms were bare, quiet, yet filled with a promise I hadn't felt in years. The realtor watched me from the entryway, respectfully silent as I absorbed every corner. They kept the original ceiling beams, she said, pointing toward the rugged wooden vigas above me. Over 2 centuries old. My fingertips brushed the textured plaster wall beside me. Santa Fe was 700 miles from Austin. But it felt like another universe. The courtyard gets great afternoon light, she continued. Perfect for reading or morning coffee. I stepped outside into the enclosed patio. A soft breeze swirled through wind chimes, their tones delicate and calming. The Sangre de Cristo Mountains stood in the distance, bathed in hues of lilac and gold. I'll take it, I said. The realtor blinked. Wouldn't you like to see the other properties I scheduled? I shook my head slowly. This one is right. That afternoon, we sat across from one another at a local notary office. The house was half the size of the one I'd left behind in Texas. And somehow, it felt twice as full of life. With every signature, it felt as if I was setting down another burden I had carried for far too long. When it was done, she handed me a key. Congratulations, she said warmly. It's a beautiful home. I smiled, but corrected her softly. It's becoming one. That night, I unpacked only what I needed, a single suitcase, 1 box of kitchen supplies, and my drafting table. Everything else stayed in storage. I hadn't decided yet what parts of my old life deserved to follow me into this new chapter. I placed the drafting table by the window that offered the widest view of the mountains. As the sun melted into the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of coral and violet, I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper. This time, the sketch wasn't for a client. It was for me. Each pencil stroke settled something inside me. A calm I hadn't known in years spread through my chest. Then my phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. Your parents moved into the West Side apartments yesterday. 2-bedroom. Tessa helped them. I set the phone down without responding. A second message followed moments later. Cody accepted a job at Miller Construction. Full-time. Comes with health insurance. A quiet smile touched my lips. Not out of spite. Not because they were struggling. But because life had finally demanded accountability. Reality had shown up at their doorstep. The next week, Leah called. I was rearranging books in what would become my home office when her name lit up my screen. I answered. Mom told me everything, she said. The auction. Santa Fe. All of it. I paused, unsure of what she'd say next. And? She chuckled. And I'm bringing fresh-baked bread when I visit next month. She paused, teasing. Unless you prefer wine? Both, I replied, surprised by the laugh that bubbled up from somewhere deep. Definitely both. Even before I updated my website with the new address, clients started reaching out. Referrals. Industry buzz. Design travels fast in certain circles. But these projects felt different. They weren't chosen out of financial panic or family pressure. They were chosen for joy. For inspiration. One evening, while hanging a set of vintage blueprints on the wall, a new email pinged on my phone. The subject line, from Tessa. I sat down on the bed, phone in hand, thumb hovering above the screen. Her name still stirred a storm of old emotions. Still, I opened it. 6 words. I get it now. I'm sorry. No follow-up. No explanations. No requests. I read the words again. And again. Tears gathered in my eyes, not because the apology healed everything, but because it validated what I already knew. Leaving was the right decision. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. But because that message belonged to her story, not mine. My healing didn't require her apology, though a part of me hoped she'd continue healing, too. Weeks later, the cabin issue was settled. I drove back up for the weekend to finalize things. Inside, everything looked the same. Pine walls. Framed family photos with smiling faces and eyes hiding so many truths. I took each one down. Stacked them neatly in a cardboard box. And in their place, I hung framed quotes, ones that spoke of courage, growth, and becoming. By Sunday, the cabin felt different. Lighter. Its new purpose clear. On the return drive to Santa Fe, I made calls to several women's entrepreneur groups. The idea had been taking shape in my mind. I would host retreats here. Workshops for women rebuilding after loss, betrayal, or reinvention. One of my first clients, upon seeing the newly redone space, smiled and said, "From family hideaway to Phoenix retreat." Perfect symmetry. That cabin, once a monument to my family's entitlement, had become a sanctuary for rebirth. It was no longer a place where I tried to earn love. It was a place where women learned to stand again. To rise. 1 year later. Sloane stood barefoot on her back patio in Santa Fe, warm mug in hand, watching the sunrise spill golden light across the peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains. Her fingers curled around the ceramic, letting its heat seep into her skin. There were no vibrations from her phone. No messages demanding answers. No old tension clenching her stomach. "Looks like peace suits you," Daniel said from the adobe doorway, his voice easy, unhurried. Their relationship had shifted over the year. From lawyer, to confidant, to something unspoken but undeniably comforting. He was wearing worn jeans, holding his own mug. He belonged there, in her space, in that stillness. "I think it finally does," she replied, softly. Inside, her home was a reflection of who she had become. Smaller than her Austin house. But full of soul. A woven rug handmade by a local artist warmed the living room. Copper pendant lights created cozy circles on the drafting table. Her latest designs, plans for the Women's Business Retreat Center, sat waiting for one final approval. The doorbell rang. "That'll be Margot," Sloane said with a smile, crossing the tile floor. "She's bringing the cake." Her former assistant had followed her to Santa Fe and was now her business partner. A few steps behind Margot came Leah, arms full of fresh wildflowers. "No one throws a birthday like someone who spent years organizing everyone else's lives," Leah declared, grinning as she set the bouquet on the counter. Sloane laughed. A sound that had once felt rare and rusty now came easily. That night, her patio glowed under twinkling string lights. 8 people sat around her table. Real friends. People who knew her story but never made demands. They brought dishes. Poured wine. Washed glasses without being asked. Margot raised her glass just before the first slice of lemon cake was cut. To the woman who taught me that giving without limits isn't generosity, it's a sacrifice no one sees. To the woman who showed me that walking away isn't weakness, it's courage. To Sloane. Everyone echoed her name. Sloane blinked, something swelling in her chest. Not pride. Not even joy. Just acceptance. Later, with the candles blown out and the laughter fading into quiet music, Daniel helped load the dishwasher. Sloane's phone lit up on the kitchen counter. A text. From Tessa. Right on schedule, another yearly attempt to reconnect. Daniel noticed her hesitation. You don't have to open it, he said gently. I know, she said, and slid the phone into a drawer without a second glance. There was no bitterness left. The rage had burned clean long ago. Some doors don't stay shut because we're angry. Some stay closed because we finally found better rooms to live in. The next morning, Sloane drove out to the cabin, the same one that once echoed with her family's careless laughter. Now, it hummed with purpose. The new sign at the entrance read, Your worth isn't defined by what you give away. A young woman waited on the porch, portfolio in hand. Nervous. Eager. Hopeful. Sloane recognized the look. I'm Alicia, the woman blurted as they sat down. My parents say interior design is just expensive shopping. They want me in law school. Sloane smiled. Let's look at your work first, she said. They flipped through the pages together. Designs full of raw potential. Then, over iced tea, Sloane said, people often confuse being loved with being useful. I spent 30 years tying my value to what I provided. But love, real love, sees you even when you stop producing. Alicia's eyes softened. Did your family ever get it? Sloane looked out at the trees swaying in the breeze. That was never the goal, she said. That evening, Sloane sat alone on the dock behind the cabin, feet skimming the water. The silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt sacred. Her phone sat untouched inside. She looked out at the rippling lake and whispered, I built my life in silence, not because I had nothing to say, but because I finally knew my voice mattered. And the wind, warm and quiet, seemed to whisper back, yes. It does.